Imagine your life savings. Everything you've worked for, everything set aside for your future, for your children. Maybe it's enough to buy a house or secure a comfortable retirement. Now, imagine it's all gone. Not in a stock market crash or a housing bust, but in a slow, creeping fire that burns through the very value of your money. Imagine your entire nest egg, once capable of buying a legacy, is now barely enough for a single loaf of bread. This isn't a scene from some dystopian movie. This was the reality for millions of hardworking, sensible Germans in the year 1923. An entire generation of the middle class, people who played by the rules, saved their money, and trusted their government, saw their wealth turn into worthless paper in a matter of months. Their savings accounts, their war bonds, their pensions, all of it turned to dust. It was a complete and total monetary collapse, an economic apocalypse that scarred the nation for a century. But what if I told you that during this exact period of widespread ruin, a small group of people didn't just survive? What if I told you they became richer than ever, consolidating immense power and scooping up the assets of a nation for pennies on the dollar? They weren't magicians. They weren't necessarily insiders with secret government knowledge. They were simply people who understood the nature of money and who operated according to a specific financial blueprint. A blueprint that turned the greatest economic crisis of the 20th century into the greatest wealth creation opportunity of their lives. That strategy, the Weimar Blueprint, has been hiding in plain sight for 100 years. Today, we're going to pull it apart. We'll deconstruct this historical strategy, step by step, to show how you can protect and even grow your wealth during total monetary chaos. The patterns of history are terrifyingly clear, and the echoes of Weimar are louder than you think. The question is, will you be a victim of the next great wealth transfer, or will you be prepared? Section 1. The Great Unraveling Anatomy of a Collapse. To understand the blueprint, you first have to understand the disaster. How does a modern, industrialized nation like Germany, a powerhouse of science and industry, fall into an economic black hole? It doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, a series of seemingly logical, but ultimately catastrophic decisions. The story begins in the smoldering ruins of World War I. Germany, defeated and humiliated, was saddled with the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty demanded crippling reparations payments to the Allied powers, initially set at an astronomical 132 billion gold marks. While the terms were later renegotiated and the full amount was never paid, the immediate pressure was immense. On top of this, the German government was already drowning in its own war debt, having financed its military effort not through taxes, but by printing 156 billion marks. The nation was broke, but the bills were coming due. How do you pay a debt you can't possibly afford? The German government, the Weimar Republic, chose what seemed like the easiest path. They fired up the printing presses. They began printing money, the Papiermark, to buy foreign currency for reparations and to fund their own spending, which included vast social programs to quiet rising unrest. Think of it like this. Imagine the entire German economy as a glass of orange juice. That juice represents all the goods, services, and assets in the country. The money in circulation is the water you add to it. At first, a little water doesn't change much. But the Weimar government didn't just add a little water, they turned on the fire hose. To pay striking workers during the French occupation of the Ruhr industrial region in 1923, they unleashed a tsunami of new money. The juice became more and more diluted until it was just faintly orange-colored water. Your glass is full, but the substance, the value, is gone. That's inflation. What Germany experienced was hyperinflation. The numbers are so extreme they're hard to comprehend. In 1914, the exchange rate was about 4.2 marks to $1. By the end of 1922, it was 7,400. Then the rocket really took off. By November 1923, at the peak of the madness, a single US dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German marks. Prices weren't doubling every year or month. By the autumn of 1923, they were doubling every few days. Stories from this period sound like fiction. A man who sat down for a coffee found that the price for his second cup was double what he paid for the first. A factory would pay its workers at noon, and their families would be waiting outside to grab the cash and run to the stores before prices changed in the afternoon. People used wheelbarrows full of cash to buy groceries. In one famous story, a thief stole the wheelbarrow but left the pile of worthless money behind. This was the velocity of money gone haywire. No one wanted to hold cash for a second longer than they had to. The moment you got paid, you spent it on anything tangible that would hold its value better than paper. A lump of coal, a sack of potatoes, a theater ticket. These things became more real than the official currency. Bartering became common: a pair of shoes for a sack of flour, a piece of jewelry for some sausage. But for the German middle class, the Bürgerdom, this was a tragedy. These were the savers, the backbone of the nation. They had diligently put their money into savings accounts, government bonds, and life insurance policies. They did everything right. And they were systematically and utterly wiped out. A life insurance policy meant to provide for a widow's retirement wasn't even enough to pay for her funeral by 1923. The social fabric tore apart. The destruction of the middle class erased the lines holding society together. University professors begged in the streets. Pensioners starved. Riots became common as hungry people grew desperate. It was in this chaos that the stage was set. While the masses were impoverished and terrified, a few shrewd individuals were looking at the chaos and seeing an equation. An opportunity. They saw the rules of the game had changed, and they were about to play it better than anyone ever had. Section 2. The pivot. The insider's secret. As the German middle class was consumed by the inflationary fire, a new class of titans was being forged in its flames. While doctors and lawyers sold family heirlooms for food, these men were buying the core assets of the German economy. They weren't just surviving, they were executing one of the greatest wealth grabs in history. They were the masters of the crisis, and their king was a man named Hugo Stinnes. Before the war, Stinnes was already a successful industrialist in coal and steel. But during the hyperinflation, he rose to a mythical level of power. Time magazine would refer to him as an inflation king, and some called him the new emperor of Germany. While others drowned in worthless paper marks, Stinnes was building an empire. At his peak, he controlled thousands of companies, from mines and factories to newspapers and shipping lines. It was said he was buying entire cities for pennies on the dollar. How? He had figured out the blueprint. Stinnes understood a fundamental truth that the savers missed. In hyperinflation, the worst thing you can possibly own is cash. The second worst is being a lender. The absolute best thing you can be is a borrower. Stinnes' strategy was brutally simple. He borrowed money. He took on colossal amounts of debt, all in the rapidly dying German Papiermark. He used this borrowed money to purchase real things. He didn't speculate on the currency, he traded it for tangible, productive assets, factories, machinery, coal mines, real estate, entire corporations. Here's the magic trick. Let's say Stinnes borrowed 1 billion marks in 1922. At the time, that was a huge sum, enough to buy a major industrial company. He takes that billion marks and immediately buys a factory. Now he owns the factory, and he owes the bank 1 billion marks. A year later, that factory is still a factory. It has smokestacks, workers, and machines. It produces real goods. Its value in real terms has held. But what about the 1 billion mark loan? By November 1923, 1 billion marks was pocket change. A rounding error. It might buy you a postage stamp. Stinnes could now repay his massive debts with currency that was effectively worthless. He had swapped nothing for something. He used the government's inflation machine as his personal wealth engine. The very force that was destroying the savings of the German people was the force making him, and others like him, unimaginably rich. They were turning debt into an asset and assets into an empire. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, calculated strategy. It was a blueprint based on a few core principles just as relevant today as they were a century ago. The people who followed it, industrialists who controlled production, farmers who controlled the food supply, and those who held foreign currency, emerged from the crisis in control. They understood that when money dies, the world doesn't end. It just gets repriced. And those who understand the new pricing model can buy the world for a song. Now, let's deconstruct that very model. Section 3. The Weimar Blueprint Deconstructed. This is the core of our journey. This is the playbook that inflation kings, like Hugo Stinnes, used to build empires while their country crumbled, broken down into 4 foundational pillars. Each pillar is a principle, a fundamental law of economic survival during a monetary collapse. And as we'll see, these laws are timeless. Pillar 1. The power of debt. The great arbitrage. The first and most counterintuitive pillar is the aggressive use of debt. For most of us, debt is a liability, something to be managed and paid off. But in a hyperinflationary spiral, fixed-rate debt in the local currency transforms into your greatest asset. As we saw with Stinnes, the strategy is debt arbitrage. You borrow a currency that's losing value and convert it into an asset that will hold or increase its value. Then, you wait for inflation to erode your debt to nothing, and you pay it back with worthless money. It's the ultimate financial judo move, using the central bank's printing press to your own advantage. The data from this period is stunning. Research shows that during hyperinflation, bankruptcies actually declined. Companies that should have failed were saved because their debts were simply inflated away. The most highly leveraged firms saw their interest expenses vanish and their equity values soar. Let's make this personal. Imagine 2 families in 1920 Germany. Family A is the model of prudence. They're savers. They avoid debt. They work hard, live below their means, and put every spare mark into a savings account and government bonds. By 1921, they have 50,000 marks, a small fortune. Family B is the opposite. They see the early signs of inflation and take a huge risk. They use their small savings as a down payment on a house worth 100,000 marks, taking out a large, fixed-rate mortgage. Their friends in Family A think they're reckless. Now, fast forward to November 1923. Family A's 50,000 mark savings is literally worthless. It can't buy a box of matches. Their government bonds are just paper. They've lost everything. What about Family B? They still have their 100,000 mark mortgage. But in November 1923, 100,000 marks is so worthless it's not even transactable. The father of Family B can take a single banknote from his weekly pay off the entire mortgage, and still have enough left for a loaf of bread. They now own their home, a valuable hard asset, completely free and clear. Their debt, which looked like a crushing burden, was the very thing that saved them. This is the power of the great arbitrage. The saver is destroyed. The debtor is made whole. But it only works if you convert that borrowed currency into the right kind of assets. Which brings us to Pillar 2. Pillar 2. Real assets in AMP, productive land, the tangible kingdom. If Pillar 1 is the fuel, Pillar 2 is the vehicle. Borrowed money means nothing unless it's anchored to something real. The winners of Weimar were those who understood the profound difference between paper wealth and tangible wealth. They fled from the abstract and ran toward the concrete. What are real assets? They are things you can touch and use. Factories, machinery, tools, natural resources like coal and property. These assets have intrinsic value. A factory's value comes from the goods it produces. A coal mine's value comes from the energy it provides. This value exists independently of what any currency is doing. When the mark collapsed, Stinnes' empire of steel mills and shipping lines didn't collapse with it. They became more valuable than ever. This leads to a crucial distinction. Not all real assets performed equally. General residential real estate, for instance, was a surprisingly poor investment. Why? The government imposed rent controls to maintain social order. Landlords couldn't raise rents fast enough to keep up with inflation, while their own costs exploded. The real winners owned productive assets. The most powerful example was farmland. During the crisis, farmers became the new royalty. They controlled the one thing no one can live without: food. As cities starved, farmers who grew potatoes and raised livestock held the ultimate form of wealth. People traded their pianos and family silver for a few sacks of potatoes. Farmers didn't need to worry about the mark's exchange rate. Their wealth was measured in calories and bushels, a currency that never loses its value. The lesson is profound. It's not just about owning stuff. It's about owning stuff that does something. A factory that makes tools. A farm that grows food. A business that provides an essential service. These are the lifeboats in an inflationary storm. Pillar 3. The foreign fortress gold and amp. Hard currency. The third pillar involves looking beyond your own borders. While the German Papiermark was in a death spiral, other currencies weren't. The US dollar, the Swiss franc, the British pound, these were lifeboats of stability. Anyone who had the foresight to convert their marks into these foreign currencies before the collapse was completely shielded from the disaster. Imagine a German who, in 1921, got their hands on just 1,000 US dollars. At the time, they were simply a prudent person with a modest amount of foreign currency. By November 1923, that $1,000 was equivalent to 4.2 quadrillion marks. They could have bought entire city blocks for a fraction of their true worth. Having foreign currency was like having a key to a secret, stable world while your own was burning down. And then there was gold. For thousands of years, gold has been the ultimate antidote to monetary chaos. It can't be printed by a desperate government. Its value isn't dependent on the credit of any single nation. In Weimar Germany, those who held physical gold preserved their purchasing power perfectly. A single gold coin that could buy a fine suit in 1918 could, by 1923, buy a townhouse. This wasn't because the gold became fantastically valuable, it was because the mark had become worthless. Gold simply held its ground. However, there was a practical challenge. Transacting daily business with gold was difficult. It was mainly a tool for large-scale wealth preservation, often held in secure vaults in other countries like Switzerland to protect it from government confiscation. For day-to-day survival and for seizing opportunities, foreign cash was often more useful. This pillar highlights a crucial survival concept: system diversification. The followers of the Weimar Blueprint didn't trust the German monetary system alone. By holding assets denominated in currencies outside of Germany, they had effectively stepped outside of the burning building. Pillar 4. The business moat. Pricing power. The final pillar is one that applies as much to small business owners as it does to industrial titans. It's the concept of pricing power. Pricing power is a business's ability to raise its prices to cover rising costs without destroying demand. In hyperinflation, this isn't just an advantage, it's a matter of survival. Imagine two businesses in 1923 Berlin. The first is a construction company on a long-term government contract. They agree to build a bridge for a fixed price of 10 million marks. The project will take a year. When they sign, 10 million marks is a huge profit. But 6 months later, their costs for steel and labor have skyrocketed into the billions. The 10 million mark payment they'll receive is now worthless. they're bankrupt. The second business is a bakery. Every morning, the baker buys flour at a higher price than the day before. So, what does he do? He raises the price of his bread, maybe even multiple times a day. His customers, desperate for food, have no choice but to pay. Because the baker can immediately pass on his rising costs, he protects his profit margin. He survives. And if he has debt on his bakery, as per Pillar 1, he thrives. This is pricing power in its most raw form. Businesses that sold essential goods with short production cycles, bakeries, butchers, tool manufacturers, could ride the inflationary wave. Businesses stuck with fixed prices were obliterated. Hugo Stinnes mastered this by owning a vertically integrated empire, from the coal mine to the steel mill to the factory to the ships that exported the goods, controlling the price at every stage. This pillar teaches us that in a collapse, the nature of your income is as important as your assets. Are you a salaried employee whose wages lag desperately behind inflation? A pensioner on a fixed income? Or do you own or work for a business that has the power to adapt and reprice? Together, these four pillars, leveraging debt, acquiring productive assets, holding foreign currency and gold, and controlling businesses with pricing power, form the complete Weimar Blueprint. Section 4. The Endgame and AMP, the modern application. Every fire eventually burns out. The German hyperinflation ended swiftly in November 1923. The government, under Gustav Stresemann and the new head of the Reichsbank, Hjalmar Schacht, performed the miracle of the Rentenmark. They introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark, and simply cut off the old Papiermark. 1 trillion old marks became one new Rentenmark. But why would anyone trust it? Because it was backed by something real, a mortgage on the entire industrial and agricultural resources of Germany, the very factories and farmland the blueprint followers had been accumulating. Confidence returned. The printing presses stopped. The fever broke. But the landscape was permanently altered. The middle class was gone, its savings vaporized, its faith in democratic institutions shattered, a wound that would fester and contribute to the political horrors that followed. The great wealth transfer was complete. It's easy to look back and think a collapse like that is ancient history, impossible in our modern financial world. But the underlying forces are not. Governments worldwide continue to run massive deficits, accumulating debt that looks eerily familiar. Central banks continue to create unprecedented amounts of money. The ingredients are on the table. The lessons from the Weimar Blueprint aren't just historical curiosities, they're a timeless manual for financial self-defense. Let's translate the pillars to today. Pillar 1. The power of debt. Today, this means using fixed-rate debt as a tool. A 30-year fixed-rate mortgage is a classic example. As inflation rises, the real value of your mortgage payment falls every year, while the nominal value of the house likely rises. You're paying the loan back with cheaper and cheaper dollars. Pillar 2. Real assets and AMP, productive land. Today's factories are cash-flowing businesses and stocks in companies that produce essential goods. Today's farmland isn't just agricultural land, it's also possessing an in-demand, practical skill. Are you a plumber, an electrician, a nurse, a software developer? A skill that provides real value is a productive asset that can't be inflated away. Investing in yourself is a core part of this pillar. Pillar 3. The foreign fortress. This is more accessible than ever. You can hold foreign currencies through brokerage accounts. Gold and precious metals still serve their ancient role. And today, we have a new potential addition: Bitcoin and other decentralized cryptocurrencies. For some, they represent non-sovereign digital assets that exist outside the traditional system, a 21st century Swiss vault. The key is diversifying your wealth outside of any single political or monetary system. Pillar 4. The business moat. Pricing power is still king. When you invest, ask, does this company sell something people need? Does it have a brand that lets it raise prices? Think of dominant companies selling consumer staples, energy, or essential technology. For individuals, this also means cultivating income streams that aren't fixed. A salaried job is a fixed price contract. A side hustle or a small business gives you pricing power over your own labor. The story of the Weimar Republic is more than a history lesson, it's a warning. It reveals a fundamental truth about money. When pushed to the brink, the rules can be broken. The system designed to reward savers can be turned on its head to destroy them, all while enriching those who understand the new game. Hyperinflation is not an accident. It is a policy. It is a transfer of wealth from those who hold the currency to those who owe the currency. From the savers to the debtors. From the financially unprepared to the financially literate. The Weimar Blueprint isn't about predicting the future. It's about preparing for a possibility that has repeated itself throughout history. The strategy is clear: anchor your wealth in real things. Position yourself as a borrower of depreciating currency. Diversify your assets beyond the reach of any single government. And cultivate income streams that can adapt. The greatest transfers of wealth don't happen during times of prosperity. They happen during times of crisis, chaos, and collapse. They happen when money dies. The blueprint is in your hands. The time to start building your financial ark isn't when the rain begins to fall. It's now.